Hi, welcome on this new class, Art102. In this class, we're going to talk about art and composition and lighting and all the basics knowledge that everyone working in visual effects, especially for matte painting, should have. So in this Art102 class, we are going to talk about the basic composition rules like the centered composition, the rule of third, the golden triangles. Then we're going to talk about a more advanced composition system like the golden ratio, golden spiral, contrast composition, negative space, continuity, similarity, all this sort of thing. Then we'll go in Photoshop and I'll show you how to work on an image to find through the crop and the rotation a nice composition for an image. Then we'll talk about lighting, how to paint the lights, how to express something with light. So before doing all these sort of things, we'll analyze a little bit how the light works and how to create a space with light. Then we talk about color harmony from the monochromatic, analogous, complementary till split complementary, double complement, tetrade. We'll go through examples from photographs and paintings. We'll talk about perspective and depth, how to create some nice perspective in a painting or a photograph by working with overlaps, creating some lines, using the haze or the different colors. Scale is something which is also quite important to add some details and create a nice perception and understanding of the scale of a scene, especially when you're working with a building, for example. We then will analyze some images, some photographs or some painting completely from scratch. So we'll talk about, the composition, the color, the light, direction, all the different aspects that we have expressed before. We're just going to try to apply and understand them through some photographs and some paintings. Then we'll see how to improve an image by going again into Photoshop and start a bit of treatment. So from, the crop for the composition to a bit of grading, work a bit on the lights. Like again, we're going to try to use everything that we've been learning so far to improve an image in Photoshop. And finally, we'll talk about how to go from a concept to a photoreal environment. What makes the difference between a concept design and something which looks real? So this first class is going to be about the basic composition rules. So we're going to start with the centered. And the center composition is, for example, the last super. Here, as you can see, everything is symmetrical, and that's what's going to be very important in a centered composition. Obviously, the main subject is going to be in the center of the painting or the photograph. That's why it's called centered, but more than just placing the most important object or subject into the center, we're also going to walk into an idea of symmetry, especially in the painting. In the photograph, it's going to change a little bit, but here you see it's really symmetrical. You can see that the perspective line are exactly symmetrical from the center. You have the same amount of space from the center for the windows. Even the people are placed in a way which is relatively symmetrical. So being centered means really working on the symmetry. It's something which is really, really important at the time. The idea with this is that with these big lines that you can see here and there, obviously you go straight into the center. So everything is going through in the direction of the main subject here. So that's quite handy to focus and to express something with the center composition. When we do the center composition for a portrait, usually we're gonna have a tendency to place one eye right on the center. So you're gonna see that a lot in the painting, but also in photographs actually, because we have we are using a lot this technique of placing one eye. So the advantage is that instead of having the nose, which would be the center of the face, right in the middle, and have this perfect symmetry for between the eyes and the center line, we just shift a little bit the face just to place one eye. So the idea when we do that is actually it gives more focus on one eye instead of putting the focus in between the eye, and the result of that is that you get the impression that the person is looking at you. So that's a very common way to photograph someone. So if you want to do a portrait for someone, you're going to want to place the topic, the subject in the center of the frame, obviously, but try to just shift a little bit the head, moving the head a bit just to have one eye in the center line. You see that it brings a lot of focus on this, the look of the subject that you are photographing or you are painting. So for the Mona Lisa, it's exactly what is happening here. So you've got the impression that she's looking at you. We can spend a lot of time to talk about this painting for the background, especially, and a few things, the lighting, but we are focusing on the composition here. So I'm just going to talk about the centered composition. Another example for a photograph, this picture, which is really famous, that I'm sure you know. Again, this look is really intense because we really focus on the eye, because one of the eyes is exactly in the center of the frame. So that's very common for portraits, obviously, to use center composition. In photograph, of course, in painting, but also in movies. So in this film, for example, you can see that you've got a very perfect use of the centered composition. So yes, you're going to have a few differences in the backgrounds, but mainly this time we are right in the middle of the ship, and that's a perfect centered composition. So you'll see that here it's different because it's not the eye which is right on the center line, it's actually the nose. So that's what I told you before. The difference here is that you're no longer interested in the look of the main subject here. He seems to not be looking at you. He's looking through the windshields of, I don't remember what he's driving, like a submarine. And he's not looking at you. So you lose a little bit the connection with the main subject here, because it's no longer the eye which is right in the center, but it's actually perfectly symmetrical. It's the nose. So this is why if you want to keep the intensity of the look, you want to place one eye. If you just want to represent a scene where you don't want to be part of, but just having the centered composition, then you can play with the perfect center of the main character. So another thing which is quite interesting with the center composition on this photo, for example, is that even if this child in the middle of this snowy environment, this park, is way smaller in size and intensity than the trees, you're actually going to focus very naturally on her because she's right in the center. So again, we are here in a centered composition, and it's a very good way as well if you detach the topic, the subject from the rest of the background. Here, the case is that the girl is, kind of backlit on top of some very bright snow. So you see her by contrast, and we're going to talk about that a bit later during this course. But so you can see her because you create a bit of negative space around her, and you see her in the middle of all these trees because first she's different from the rest of the objects, the subjects in the photo. That's the only human, but she's right in the middle. So it's really easy to just boom, catch the position and focus on her straight away. She's right there. That's the centered composition. It's really powerful. So that's going to be the first sort of composition that people are going to experiment when they do some photos, for example, because it's really easy. You just place the objects or subjects that you want to photograph right in the middle of your frame, and it gives you a centered position, and it works. You are going to have the focus on it. What is really interesting is that you can also shift the focus from what should be the focus onto another object just by placing these other objects in the middle of the frame. This is the case of this photograph. This photograph could be about the characters here, the guy holding the umbrella or the other one in the back painting. But actually, no, what you're going to see here is the cello. The main character here is no longer the human. It's just going to be this cello case, because the cello case is right in the middle of the frame. So that's quite interesting how you can shift the interest from what should be the obvious character, main character, into a secondary subject like this cello box, which is just backlit cello box here, just because it's been put right in the center. The umbrella is also right in the center, which really explain where we need to look at. And actually the character, the guy holding the umbrella, is looking outside. So by looking outside, we kind of lose interest in this character. So we are no longer really attaching a lot of importance to him, and we shift our focus on the piece which is right in the center of the frame, which is the cello. So that's the center composition, which is a very easy way to frame and to compose an image. Remember that the symmetry is something which is quite interesting. If you look at this image, for example, you have a symmetry between the lamppost on the right and the painter on the left as well. You know, around this cello at roughly the same distance, you have two elements which comes darker on top of the background. So it creates lines in a symmetric way. So when you work with the centered composition, it's actually quite nice to also try to create some symmetry around this centered composition. So that was the first example that I wanted to talk to you about in this class. The second composition is going to be the rule of third. So the rule of third is this can represent the rule of third. You have here in the frame same distance, two lines which is going to be split the width, and two lines which are going to split the height equally. So that's why we call it the third. And with these lines, you also have 4 points at the intersection, which are going to be the center of interest of this image. So when we talk about the rule of third, it's not that much about the lines themselves. You can really play with the lines, of course, especially if you talk about like where to place the horizon. But what is really interesting is also these 4 points, which are the 4 points of interest. So if we look at this photograph, for example, you can see that despite the complexity and this geometrical approach of photograph, you very clearly focus on the bicycle and the guy on the bicycle, because they are right in the position of one intersection point. So that's how you are creating composition using the rule of third. If you look at this image here, actually you have a line around there which is on the third as well, which is in continuity of the bicycle and the ramp here. So that's quite interesting. And here vertically you have this guy here, and you have this very strong line. So that's the rule of third here, with 1 point basically used. You don't want to use the 4 points of interest when you play with the rule of third. That would be quite tricky. That would probably feel really symmetrical. So usually you don't use all of the the points. You're going to use 1. Sometimes you're going to use 2. We're going to look at other example in a second. But it's just that naturally, if there is nothing really interesting right in the center of the frame, you're naturally going to start to look a bit around the center. And the first 4 points that you're going to meet, which are worth placing something with interest, are going to be these 4 points that are at the cross of the 4 lines. So that's a very interesting composition rule, very easy to use as well. Photographs are using it a lot. In this very specific example, some of you might recognize as well a golden spiral that we're going to talk about in the next class when we're going to talk about the golden ratio. That's another composition rule. A lot of rules can be used together, one on top of each other. That it's not like you have one rule or another one. You can mix them and play with them. It's just like guides, which create an image that feels right. So it's not so much about being very strict and be like, right, I'm going to place it exactly here and that's it for the rest of my life. It's more like knowing the different ways to create some images that feel balanced, and then start to play with this, and eventually creating some variations. Let's move on to a film now for a change with Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones here is another example of the rule of third. Why? Because if you look at this image, you would say, oh no, actually it's split right in the middle. Yes, it's split right in the middle. You have this section here, and you have this section there, and you have with this light a nice split that really split the image into equal parts. But actually, if this is the center, you have one line here, and you have another line around here, or here maybe, and this is actually where, so Indy is walking in this, so obviously at some point it's going to be right there, and there is this very big face here with these big eyes looking right in the direction of Indiana Jones, so the main character here. So, and where is this eye? This eye is right in the center of this point. So boom, rule of thirds here, and here another rule of third with this character, which is also where Indiana Jones is. So we can see that you have really one side here and another side there. So that's how you can use also the rule of third in a bit less obvious way. The eye itself would be pretty much right and on the top of the points of interest that I showed you before. Of course, that might be a camera move. You can have the main character moving, so it's not like fixed all the time, but it creates a nice balance in the image. We have other stuff that are quite interesting in this image. We might talk about it again later when we're going to talk about scale and when we're going to talk about light. But this is a very interesting image. But composition-wise, you can see here the use of a rule of third relatively easily. If you want a more obvious use of the rule of third, you can have this from another movie. So here, as you can see, the eye is placed on one of the line, and the tie is following the line as well, and obviously the face is on one of the intersection. So that's why we're talking about rule of third here as well. You are right in the good example of that. So as you can see, you don't have symmetry here anymore. You have the character really placed on the left-hand side, and it's the total opening on the right. You don't really have anything on the right-hand side, so you're not using any symmetry between the two lines that are defining the third for the verticals. You just place it on one side, but it doesn't feel so unbalanced, because even if it weights more on the left, because you place the main character on the left very close to you and it's totally open on the right, because the opening on the right-hand side is twice pretty much the size of where it's kind of closed on the left, then it feels balanced. So that's how you're going to play with the rule of third, by putting something close to the camera that, kind of cuts the background, because you are filling it with something here. In that case, it's the station. So it feels dark. You don't have the depth anymore. You can't see far away. So it feels weighted compared to the right-hand side, but because the right-hand side has twice the space on screen, then it feels more balanced. If you had actually split everything in half, that would have been a bit different, because that would have weighted probably too much on the left, even if it was split in the middle, just because when it's dark, as it is on the left-hand side of this frame, when it's close to us, it feels heavier. On the right-hand side is defocus, it's bright, it goes in the distance, you have nice perspective lines with the tracks, the windows, that it feels lighter. So that's how you can compose your image and make sure that you end up with something which will balance. So rule of thirds is a bit more complicated than the centered composition, but it's also very interesting. Creates a lot of possibility. It's good when you want to have like someone looking far away or looking outside of the frame, because obviously you're going to place the character on one of the vertical line, and you're gonna have twice the space on the right or on the left hand side to express or to show or to suggest what the character is looking at. So it's a nice way to create a bit of questions and let the spectator like invent or imagine a little bit what the main character is looking at. So that was the rule of thirds and the centered. Now I would like to talk about the golden triangles. So first of all, what are the golden triangles? So the golden triangles are a rule of composition which has been highly developed in the Baroque time for the paintings. And it consists in having one very strong line joining two corner, and then you have two secondary lines joining the other corners and perpendicular to the first one. So that's what is represented here. You see the big diagonal, and then you have two smaller lines which are connecting the corner with the main diagonal with a perpendicular. It's really important that it's like that. So we call it golden triangles. So as you can see, you have 4 triangles here. And basically the position of the lines just vary, with the format of the canvas. So if it's a vertical one or if this is a horizontal one, and how wide it is, how flat it is. We'll have a look at it in the third class when we're going to go on Photoshop. We'll play with this a little bit. So in the meantime, that's the golden triangle. And now let's have a look at some photos that are actually using them. So here in this one, you can see the main diagonal right there. So you can really see the use of it. Everything is left black here because we don't really want to create anything here. It's not really interesting. We really want to focus on these 2 characters. And here, just by placing the leg is going to connect this main diagonal with this corner here in a perpendicular way. So we are exactly in the use of the golden triangle. In that case, we don't need to have the second one, just one is working. We don't need necessarily all of them. But as you can see here, you suggest this big diagonal and you have this secondary line. So that's the composition called with golden triangle. It's been really, really used a lot in this sort of paintings. And what is interesting, and we'll talk about this in the negative space course next time, is that it leaves a lot of space in the frame. Depending on how you are going to compose everything, you can potentially have a lot of space. So you could have, cropped everything and have and do a composition just here, but actually by just leaving all of this space here being dark, you create this negative space, you focus on these 2 characters and you have a nice composition, and you can actually represent that the main character is, on the back lying, because you can see the foot, because you are using this whole diagonal to go from one corner to another one and representing the guy in his integrality. And then you go back in the corner with this perpendicular here, a bit of light on the knee to make sure that you are starting the point here, and then a bit of light on the foot to make sure that you're not going to miss this line. If it had been on the dark, on the shadow, you might have not focused on it as much, but by placing the knee and the foot in the light, then you're sure to see everything correctly. So that's quite nice. So that's the golden triangles. This is another example here. Here it's a bit more complex, but you clearly have the diagonal with the leg and the sword, and you have another perspective going top right with the edge of the wing, and top left a bit less because you can't really see any line there, but you have this arm with the light here, which really suggests that these lines exist as well. So it's a bit more difficult to see, but it's clear that the main diagonal is done here, and that's clearly like a composition using this line. It's really strong. It gives a lot of power and a lot of weight, in this composition. That's a nice one. Another example, with the illustration. So here, what I really like in this one is that obviously it's really clear to see the main diagonal, with the clothed ends, the shoulder, this body. So that really creates the line, but it doesn't go until the end. So it just suggests the line, and then you just finish the walk to reach the top right corner. That's the main diagonal. And then for the small lines, so you have the one obviously with the leg coming into the bottom right, which is not completely in the corner, but it's not far, as I say. Like, you don't have to be completely strict. It's the idea to follow the rules. So you have this secondary line going into the bottom right, and you have this top left one with the angle of the head and where the main character is looking at. And that's something which I find really interesting. The line is created by the interest of the main subject. He's looking top right. That's enough to create the line. You don't need necessarily to represent it to pens with edges and lines and stuff. You can just suggest the line by just putting the eye in the direction, and this is where he's looking at. So by looking here, it means that this is the line of interest. So that's a very nice example as well. So obviously these are all paintings from roughly the same time, and I told you that it's been used a lot during the Baroque. But you can play with these golden triangles and create your own, composition. For example, I've played and I created this photograph myself, which is an example of the golden triangle. So obviously I'm playing with distorting a little bit the rules, but I have the main diagonal here, obviously, and with the steps from the stairs I can create the secondary lines perpendicular to the first one and going into the corners. So I think it gives something which is quite interesting, because naturally this image feels balanced but also quite dynamic. So in this particular example, I did a few other tricks that we are going to talk about. For example, the fact that the shoes have a very bright white edge in an area which is a bit darker than the right hand side is actually interesting, because this image is kind of split with this diagonal in two. You have the left hand side which is relatively dark and the right hand side which is really bright. So adding a little bit of contrast in it is creating a bit the effect of the yin and yang. With the shoes producing this bright edge, you have like a symmetry with the dark backpack that the girl in the stairs are carrying on her back. So you have a little bit of, yes, there is a dark touch into this bright section, and you have a bright touch into this dark section. So that's what I say, that it's a bit like the yin and the yang. So it's also going to add a nice way to balance the image. It's going to feel, in terms of weight, it's going to feel interesting. I'm often talking about weight in an image, because it's really important to have an image that feels balanced. If you zoom out on a photo and you've got the impression that if you were putting it on a wall that would fall on one side, like on the left or on the right, it's because your image weight differently and not balanced. That notion of weight is quite interesting. Something which is going to be dark close to you is going to feel heavy. Something which is going to be brighter and further away is going to feel a bit more aerial and light. So you want to balance that by having a nice relationship between what is heavy and how much of heavy you have in the frame compared to how much of light you have. And you need to have something which is light, like in a bigger quantity than what is heavy. Otherwise it's going to feel a bit unbalanced, but we'll talk about this a bit later as well. So another example here of a diagonal plus some perpendicular to create a golden triangle composition. So you see, feel free to take your camera and try to do some centered composition, rule of third composition, and golden triangle composition. The three of them are what I call like the basic compositions. They're really easy to do. You take your phone, you go outside, you just shoot some photos and you play. Try to actually shoot to have that result instead of, go for something and just find how to treat it later. It's always better to have the idea before and to create the image with the idea of what you want to do. So that's it. Three first composition rules in this art102 class course. Centered composition, just to recap, centered composition, bring the focus on the main topic, on the main subject, which is right in the middle, even if you have secondary subject around. Quite interesting to create symmetry if you can, but you don't have to. But if you create a nice symmetry, it's even better. If you have a portrait, if you want to take a photo of someone, try to place an eye in the center if you want to create an interest with the look. If you want to give the impression that this person is looking at you, place one of the eye on the center line. It's going to be very efficient. Rule of thirds, so 4 points of interest which are more stronger than the rest of the frame. So try to place the main subject here. If you have a character, to try to place one eye or the face on one of these points, it's going to be interesting. If you have a horizon line, try to place it either at the top third or the lower third, but not right in the middle. You'll see that your image feels more balanced if you have a bit of sky and more sea, for example, or a bit of sea and more sky. And then the golden triangle, which is, as we just said, a main diagonal and one or two secondary line perpendicular to the main diagonal, creates a lot of dynamic weight. It's quite interesting and it's been used a lot in the Baroque painting. So that's it, guys, for the first class. So second class, we're going to talk about the golden ratio, the golden spiral, and a few other ways to create composition with contrasts and negative space. So that's it. Thank you very much and see you soon.